Good evening, everyone. The Yukon Human Rights Commission is honored, privileged, and excited to be working with Queer Yukon to bring you this panel discussion on policing in Canada. I will be moderating this evening's panel discussion together with our esteemed guests. Our itinerary for this evening's event will consist of the panel discussing some critical questions around the subject of policing in Canada for approximately 1 hour, followed by a 30-minute question and answer session with the audience. Panelists will each have 5 minutes per question with some opportunities for crosstalk if necessary and if desirable. You will see a question and answer feature in the menu at the bottom of your screen, which will allow you to ask questions during the question and answer period. If you would like a specific panelist to answer a question, please specify this in your question. If not, all of the panelists will be provided a few minutes to answer the question, ideally 2 minutes each to maximize the number of questions. And just before we introduce our panelists, I'm going to turn the floor over to Mona Luxon for the land acknowledgement and some introductory remarks. So Mona, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Bijou. Yeah, my name is Mona Luxon. My pronouns are they, them. I'm the president of Queer Yukon Society. And I'm just delighted to welcome all of you to this event. I'm really excited about it. And it's great to have you all here. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the territory of the Kwanlundun First Nation and the Tahnkwitchin Council, and just to express my gratitude to the caretakers of these lands and waters and the communities they belong to. I'm delighted that we have Chief Doris Bill with us today as well to join the panel, so that's fantastic. Yeah, I also want to just recognize that this is a really heavy time for a lot of us in light of discoveries at former residential schools, the attacks in London, Ontario, events in Palestine, and many other griefs, private and shared. And I'm glad that so many of you were able to take time to be here. And I hope you'll be able to take care of yourselves as well. Yeah, our goal for Pride this year has really been to try and balance celebratory events with ones that will give our community the tools we need to grow in strong and healthy ways. And so this is definitely one of those events. And we're also offering a free online bystander intervention training on June 23rd, which I think will be really good. Given the current COVID outbreak, we've actually postponed all of our in-person events kind of as of today, but our online events will be continuing. And so you can check those out at yukonpride2021.com or on the Queer Yukon website. I also want to thank the Human Rights Commission for the partnership on this event. It's a really fantastic partnership. I'm grateful for it. Yeah, I'm really excited to get to the panel, so I won't spend too much time, but I did want to just talk a little bit about why this is a Pride event and why it's important to us as queer and trans and two-spirit people to talk about alternatives to the police. I think many of us know of Pride as kind of something that evolved out of the Stonewall Uprising in 1969, which was a series of protests and riots against a police raid at the Stonewall Inn in New York. But attacks on LGBTQIA and two-spirit people by the police aren't limited to the US or to the distant past. And here in Canada, police have raided queer and trans establishments regularly, at least through the 1990s, including one of the largest mass arrests in Canadian history in 1981 during what was called Operation Soap, raids on gay bathhouses in Toronto. And in 1990, Montreal police raided a gay loft party called Sex Garage, where they were actually caught on camera removing their identification badges and beating up party goers. So this is kind of one of the catalysts of the gay rights and LGBTQIA two-spirit rights movement here in Canada. And I think it's important to recognize that was in 1990. It's not that long ago. Police forces in Canada haven't just been homophobic in the past and failed to address that past homophobia, but they also continue not to protect their communities. In 2019, I think some of you will probably remember that right-wing protesters showed up in Hamilton at Hamilton Pride to harass and even attack participants. And the Hamilton police took forever to show up and then ended up actually arresting the queer counter-protesters instead of the instigators of the violence. But they deny mishandling the situation. We also know that LGBT people in Toronto were ignored by police for years, raising concerns about a serial killer who was preying on gay men of color, especially, who was finally convicted in 2019. And just earlier this year in April, a report from a judge actually found that there were systems and practices in place in the Toronto police that systematically discriminate against the LGBTQ community and against marginalized and vulnerable communities in general. And so I just want to recognize that even in addition to facing violence and police misconduct as LGBTQIA and two-spirit people, members of our community also face over-policing, harassment, and even violence for being Indigenous, for being Black or people of color, for being sex workers, for being drug users, for experiencing mental illness or disability, being newcomers to Canada, and more. And that we can't look to an institution that was established to seize territory from Indigenous peoples, and that continues to mishandle the cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit people, to perpetuate sexual assault rather than resolving it, to attack people in mental health crises, to murder young men of color, especially. We can't rely on this system to provide us and our communities with safety. And so we owe it to ourselves and to our friends and to our neighbors and to our communities to figure out alternatives. And that's what I'm really excited to hear about from our panelists and from the audience in the Q&A. So with that, I'll hand it over to Birju and to the rest of the panel. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mona, for that. And we are tremendously pleased and excited by this partnership with Queer Yukon as well, and what we hope will be the first of many in the future. And with that being said, I thought we'd take a few minutes to introduce ourselves. And in particular, if everyone could introduce or include rather their names, their pronouns, and whose land they are on, together with 2 minutes of biographical data. And just before, and I'll begin, but just before I do so, I'd like to mention that protocol dictates that Chief Doris Bill would ordinarily speak first, but at her request, she will speak last in response to the discussion questions, as well as this introductory portion. So my name is Birju Detani. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm the director of the Yukon Human Rights Commission. I'm speaking to you all this evening from the traditional territory of the Kwanlin Dun First Nation and the Tanquachan Council. Before taking up my role here at the Commission, I was Assistant Director of the Alberta Human Rights Commission's Northern Regional Office. Prior to that, I was a teaching fellow in the Faculty of Law at the School of Oriental and African Studies of the University of London, as well as the London School of Economics. I'll sort of end that there, and I'll turn it over to Duane to introduce, for Duane to introduce himself.
Kuchish, Masiti gat yuani aketsu yusatini. Klenglin shish hat yunadi. Klenglin shish algonquin kwan aketsu yusatini. My name is Duane Gastant Aucoin. I'm Tlingit. Also thanked everyone for being here today and for the panelists, for everybody who's watching, the Human Rights Commission, and also thank the Algonquin people I'm a guest on their territory right now in the Ottawa Valley. I've been here about a year and a half looking after my dad who lives here. So it's just an honor to be here tonight. I'm from Teslin. I've been on executive council since 2009. I'm in my fourth term right now. Geez, I'm becoming old timer. Going to end up in elders council soon. But done a lot of work within Teslin and with the Indigenous rights, and the Teslin Council is in current negotiations with Canada in regards to us taking back our ownership of our own justice system, whether it's the courts or enforcement or corrections. That we need to do it our way, like we've done for thousands of years before the crown came around. And so that's what we're in the process of right now. Also here in Pembroke, even though I'm in the Teslin Council embassy here in Pembroke, that there's still I had that need to try to make a difference here as well. And so there's a lot of racism here in the Ottawa Valley, unfortunately. And there's a lot of great people too. And so those great people have stepped up as well. And there's a new diversity committee that's been started up here in Pembroke that I played a part in. And it's for us BIPOC, for those who don't know who BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and for the LGBTQ2S+ community, for us to have a voice here in Pembroke so that we can help make this a safer community for all of us. So still working in the Yukon. One of the benefits of this pandemic is all this virtual technology. I'm the virtual executive counselor still with Teslin Council, doing my work while I'm down here. My clan has allowed me to do that, and my nation has allowed me to do that, and I'm so grateful for that. And so silver linings. So I really look forward to this discussion tonight. Kuchish.
Thank you so much for that, Duane. If I can call upon Rachel to introduce herself whenever you're ready, Rachel.
Sure. So my name is Rachel Bromburg, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm speaking to you today from the city of Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I'm really excited to be here with you tonight. Little bit about myself professionally. So I'm the co-founder of the Reach Out Response Network, which is an advocacy-focused nonprofit that's working with the City of Toronto to support them in developing a non-police alternative crisis response service. I'm also the executive director of the International Crisis Response Association, which is a service providers network connecting folks across Canada and the United States who are building or leading similar services in their communities. I also work at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, providing trauma-informed de-escalation training for their inpatient and outpatient staff. And I've worked in the mental health field for 8-ish years now. And I'm also a student in the combined law and social work program at the University of Toronto. So as you can tell, I have a lot of free time, get a lot of sleep. That's me. And thank you for having me here today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Rachel. And finally, Chief Doris Bill. I'd like to call upon Chief Doris Bill to say a few words of introduction whenever you're ready.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name, as you heard, is Chief Doris Bill. I'm Chief of the Kwanlin First Nation. I'm into my third term, and like Duane feels like a long, long time, you know, especially with all that's going on right now. It's very, very difficult. And I just want to acknowledge all of that, all of the things that people are going through. I know it's pretty difficult right now, and you know, people's mental health is being affected by all of the things that we are undergoing and the journey we have to take to get there. And anyways, like I said, I've been chief for going on to my third term. Prior to that, I was a journalist with CBC and had um, worked in television for a good majority of that time. I've also worked at a number of other media outlets, First Nation outlets, media outlets across the country. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. And I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be here tonight to have this conversation, this very important conversation. And I hope I can contribute something to it. Goodness cheese.
Thank you so much. And let me say what an honor it is for me to be hosting all of you this evening. There's a question that I'd like for all of you to speak to get us started. And I'm going to start with Duane. What are the primary issues with the traditional model of policing from your perspective? And I'll ask, of course, all of you to weigh in with your perspective, but some members of the audience may vary in terms of their familiarity with the issues that are live with respect to the subject matter. So what are the primary issues with the traditional model of policing from your perspective?
First, I forgot I'm on the Ontario time zone, so like Rachel, it's a little later here, and I'm a little older than her, so I think I'm half asleep already. So I forgot to also say I'm the vice president of the Queer Yukon Society as well, and I'm Two-Spirit, and my pronouns are whatever you feel like calling me. Like a lot of my family call me Auntie. I love that, Auntie Duane. So policing. Being Two-Spirit, being part of the LGBTQ2S plus community, being Indigenous, that's a double whammy when it comes to not a great relationship with the police automatically from the get-go. It started with my mother's first experience with the police is when the Indian agent and the RCMP came to Teslin and dragged her away to Lower Post, threw her in the back of a cattle truck, and threatened my grandparents with jail if they didn't allow her to be stolen away. That's my personal experience with first experience with the police, because you know I was part of my mom at that time when that happened. And then, like what Mona had mentioned with Stonewall, and June 28th, 1969, that was 1 month before I was born. The riots happened in the Stonewall riots in New York. And I've been to New York twice, and I've always made sure went to Stonewall, because it's like this ground zero of when the queer community stood up to the police and said, nope, no more. We had enough of this. And it was black trans women who were the ones who were the leaders in that, standing up. And so that's why with every Pride that I always make sure to remind these young kids, these gabies, that don't forget all the struggles that it took to get us to where we are today. And when we look at the Indigenous community, like I had mentioned, the RCMP were used to enforce the Indian Act. And the RCMP and the whatever police force, they're still used to continue the colonial oppression of us Indigenous peoples. When I see a police person, some of my white friends, they feel secure when they see a police person. When I see a police person, I feel fear. Automatic. Doesn't matter if I've done anything wrong or guilty of anything. It's just an automatic fear from seeing the police. when I see them driving, when I see them walking, and that shouldn't be. But it is because of the historic oppression that they've inflicted upon us. And even as a queer person, as a two-spirit person, and it continues today, like Mona had mentioned in Toronto with the Bruce MacArthur, and that's racism and homophobia that's involved with the Bruce MacArthur case. Because how long did the queer community tell the police there's a serial killer here, and nothing was done? Because it's queers, and there were people of color, there were BIPOC. Most of the men that went missing were immigrants or people of color. So the police just ignored it until it was too late, until 8 lives had to be lost. You know, I used to hang out in some of those bars in Toronto at that time that Bruce MacArthur used to hang out, and some of his victims hung out. I'm a person of color. Did he talk to me? I don't recognize him. But then again, after a few drinks and that late at night with the dark lights and stuff, you don't recognize people. Maybe I bumped into him, maybe I didn't. But because the police didn't do anything, because this is just brown queers, it wasn't a priority to them, my life was at risk, and so was everyone else. Thank to Keon Kao that I'm alive today to tell that story, that it still crosses my mind. So yeah, there has to be, there's a role for enforcement. And I know Chief Bill Doris is going to talk about how her community is integrating their model. So there is a role for enforcement, not the current role. Police shouldn't be the first ones to call when there's somebody that's having an addictions issue or mental health issue. So I think with this whole Black Lives Matter too, that's really brought that also to the forefront with the whole defund the police. It probably could be worded a little better, because of course the pundits are like, oh, you want to get rid of the police. No, we want to take a lot of the funding that goes towards the police and move it towards mental health and social services and addictions treatment. So it's coming up with a new model that actually holds us up as a community and keeps us all safe, not just those of white ancestry.
Thank you for that, Duane. Rachel, if I can ask you the identical question, what are the primary issues with the traditional model of policing from your perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll speak specifically around police response to mental health crisis because that's my wheelhouse and my area of expertise. So, you know, our organization has done a lot of research on this topic, and we've also done a lot of community engagement around this topic. We did a whole bunch of town halls, focus groups, individual interviews last summer with the city of Toronto, or, you know, for the city of Toronto. And we spoke in particular with the most marginalized communities. We started with Black folks, Indigenous folks, but we also had some focus groups with deaf folks, or with folks with developmental disabilities, or autistic folks whose voices are not often amplified, but who are often users of these kinds of crisis services and who often have had negative experiences with police. And what we heard uniformly, particularly amongst the most marginalized community members, was that regardless of the skill level or training of the individual officer, whether the individual officer is a nice guy or a good cop or not, just having police show up in uniforms with guns, often like, you know, large men with guns and bulletproof vests, that can be really frightening and traumatizing and triggering, like just in and of itself, for lots of different people, for trauma survivors, for Black and Indigenous folks that have historically had really negative experiences with police, or individuals from communities that are over policed, whether that's queer or trans folks, Indigenous folks, Black folks, newcomers. So when someone is already in a crisis, they're already escalated, they're already distressed. Like Duane said, for a lot of folks, their automatic response to seeing police is fear. And if someone is already feeling escalated and frightened, and maybe they're hearing voices, maybe they've just experienced trauma, adding people into the mix who their mere presence is going to provoke a fear response or a fight or flight response, that's dangerous. That's not who they need to be interacting with in that moment of crisis. And beyond that, police just don't have the right tools in their toolkit to respond effectively to these kinds of crises. So, policing is set up to deal with violence and crime. It's set up to deal with, mass shootings, for example. Police do a lot of trainings and how do we respond to mass shootings or terrorist attacks or other really serious things, or, how to use a gun. Most people, they don't need a gun pointed at them. That's not the appropriate response, but police do a lot of training in how to use firearms. Mental health crisis is not a crime. A mental health crisis is a health crisis. And we know from stats, we know from 911 call data, and we know from the experience of other alternative crisis response teams that mental health crisis calls are very, very, very rarely violent. We know from Ontario 911 call data, 89% of mental health related crisis calls do not involve any kind of weapon or any type of violence whatsoever. Like the initial call doesn't involve any type of violence or danger. So that's, 89% of calls that right now police are responding to that there's really no reason for them to be there. Police are there to deal with violence and crime. There's no violence and crime to, suicidal person, for example. Just like, you wouldn't send a plumber to fix your car, you wouldn't send a mechanic to fix your toilet. It's just wrong tool set. So, when police do get onto the scene for someone in a mental health crisis, like what are their actual options? Their options are basically arresting someone, apprehending someone in Ontario under the Mental Health Act and taking them to a hospital for assessment, or basically doing nothing. Those are their three options. What we know about arrest is that, arrest is not going to solve someone's mental health problem. We know that the majority of Mental Health Act apprehensions where someone is taken to a hospital by police do not actually result in the person being admitted to hospital. They don't actually meet the criteria for admission. They don't receive care. They just get sent home after spending 4, 5, 6, 7 hours sitting in an emergency room with 2 police officers next to them, possibly handcuffed, possibly really terrified and alone and traumatized by this experience. They're not getting anything positive out of it. So all that to say, by sending police to these calls, we're setting police up for failure. There isn't anything they can actually do to help. So what we need is other options, folks who can come out into the community, who do have appropriate training in suicide intervention, in mental health support, in de-escalation, and connecting people with appropriate resources that can actually do a risk assessment on the spot, and figure out what does this person need and how can we help them.
Thank you for that, Rachel. Chief Doris Bill, I'd like to ask you the same question, which is, what are the primary issues with the traditional model of policing from your perspective?
Well, much like what Duane had talked about was Indigenous people have really had a bad history where RCMP are concerned and where policing is concerned. Much of it stems from things like residential school, when our people were taken away on cattle trucks, and some of our children were never seen again, as we're witnessing today. When you look at the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls issue, there are many cases across the country where investigations weren't handled properly. The RCMP, in some cases, there's complaints about investigations not being carried out, we have a long history, and it's not a good one, with the RCMP. In our community, we are working hard to change that. And we're seeing the results of that history in the overrepresentation of our people in the jails, and you know, we see it, a lot of the fallout from some of that. You see it on the streets today. When people, their safety is jeopardized, they don't want to call the police because of the trauma, that the past trauma. It brings up that past trauma. You know, policing, like Rachel said, it was set up to deal with violence and crime. The policing today, they don't have time to really be deeply involved in the community anymore. And they don't, you know, not that they ever were, but I think we're trying to change that, because I think when you look at policing, particularly from a community perspective, really it has to conform to the community, and has to be, when you think of community safety, it has to be built and borne by the community in order for the community to accept these kinds of programs. It's incredibly important. We have done a number of things that I'll talk about later on here in Kwanlin. We've adopted a number of measures to really improve that relationship, and we are seeing the results of that today, and it's a rewarding experience. You know, we've worked very hard, and I think you know, it's going to take time, like you know, Duane said. There was a movement to defund the police. I don't believe that's the answer. I think we need to reform the police, is what we need to focus on. How can we make these changes? When something happens, particularly from a community perspective, if let's say a violent crime happens in the community, the RCMP will come in, they'll do their investigation, they'll do what needs to be done, and then they go. They don't have the time to spend in the community afterwards, where the fallout from that crime takes place. They don't have the time to get your people the proper services that they need at times. The RCMP really are not trained to do that, and maybe nor should they. You know, there is a gap between the RCMP and the community, and we look to fill that gap to assist our citizens who really needed something more. When our community safety program was born out of um, unfortunately, the murder of a young woman in our community, and then shortly after, another murder and several um, um, violent incidents. And we found out most of the crime that was taking place in our community was taking place by other people who didn't belong in our community. And the community safety program that Kwanlin has built was really born out of the conversations that happened around that. And you know, I think that we've come a long ways, and I think that that gap has slowly been closing. And I think that you know, I can't say we've gotten rid of all the social issues as much as I would like to say, but it's certainly helped a great deal. And we've received recognition from across the country, across the United States, international recognition for the program that we have built. And you know, the community safety program that we built is not you can't take the program and say just drop it into another community. You may have to make some changes to tailor it to your community, to fit your needs. You may need to modify it. But that's what the program is about. It's a community by design program, and I think that's why it works. You know, when you look at the RCMP, they weren't built that way. The entire force wasn't set up that way, and you know, it's a colonialistic structure that's been there for 100 years, and it really it's evolved and changed over time, but evolved and changed into something that really is not it's not community driven, not community orientated. They've developed standards across the country, standards we need to from our perspective, indigenize and other things. But I'll leave it there for now. I mean, I'll add more to this discussion. I could go on all day, but I won't. Or all night.
And thank you so much for that answer. And we're hoping that this is the start of a discussion rather than the end of one, certainly. And so we're hopeful that there's going to be a lot of opportunities to continue these discussions. And that being said, and having touched upon some of those issues, primary issues, substantive issues with the traditional model of policing, I want to pivot to ask what alternatives to the traditional model of policing exist, and how do these alternatives address some of the issues faced by various segments of the LGBTQIA2S+ community. And so, Rachel, I'll ask you to weigh in on that first. I asked Duane to get us going with the first question, so I'll turn to you to get us going with this one.
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about different models of alternative crisis response that are non-police responses to crisis. So like I said at the beginning, I'm the director of a service providers network for folks across Canada and the US who are building or leading these teams. Our network right now represents over 70 towns and cities across Canada and the United States that have or are developing non-police crisis response models. And a lot of that work has been done over the past year or two, since George Floyd was killed in the United States, and then since 5 Canadians experiencing mental health crisis were killed around the same period of time by police. And that really was the catalyst for a lot of cities to start listening to the community's calls that have been made for many, many years to develop new services for responding to people in crisis and to divert police calls towards these new kinds of teams. But so a lot of this work is fairly recent, but there are some cities that have been doing this for a lot longer. So a city that has had this kind of alternative crisis response team the longest is Eugene, Oregon. They're my favorite place. I've never actually been there, but when COVID is done, this is my plan. They have a team called Cahoots. You might have heard of it because it's been in the news a lot recently. They have been around for 32 years. Their team, it's a partnership between the city of Eugene, which is a city of about 170,000 people. So it's not like a huge city like Toronto, but it's a reasonable sized city. They have a partnership between the city and a community health clinic called the Whitebird Clinic, where the Whitebird Clinic operates this team called Cahoots that is staffed by a crisis worker and a medic who are dispatched via the 911 dispatch system, and they can go out and respond to crisis calls. So if you're in Eugene, Oregon, and you call 911 and you're like, hey, say my family member is experiencing a mental health crisis, rather than police coming out to respond, this team of a medic and a crisis worker will come out and respond instead. And they have extensive training in how to support people who are in crisis. They're not a co-responder model, so they don't go out with any police officers. It's just them that will go out. And they respond to a really high volume of calls in Eugene. So they responded to about 24,000 calls in 2019, which was about 17% of all 911 calls in the entire city. And the majority of those calls, if Cahoots didn't exist, would have been responded to by police only. But because this team is there, they can take a lot of these calls off police's hands. So they, they respond to a lot of mental health related calls. They also respond to a lot of calls relating to people experiencing homelessness. They respond to a lot of calls related to substance use. They can also do general welfare checks. So they respond to a really large variety of calls, basically any type of call that's more of like a social issue rather than a police issue that doesn't involve serious violence or a criminal offense that's occurring. And Cahoots has been working with a lot of other cities over the past few years to help other cities build similar services. So they're at this point, I believe there are 7 other teams that have launched over the past 3 years that are like Cahoots style teams. So Olympia, Washington was the first other than Cahoots to launch in early 2019, and that's a city of about 50,000 people. So obviously that the Cahoots model was adapted to meet the needs of folks within Olympia. So for example, Olympia is a much geographically smaller place that has a much smaller downtown, for example, and where a lot of these kinds of crisis calls are concentrated in that downtown area, which is really only about 2 blocks, really. And Olympia is quite a different population, obviously, and different demographics than Eugene. So that obviously the model was adapted to meet that. Also, so Denver launched their team in the summer of 2020, which again, much larger population than Eugene, much more diverse population, more linguistically diverse. So again, model was adapted to meet needs of the local community. Portland launched, or San Francisco launched their team in, I believe, September or October of last year. Portland, Oregon launched their team in February of this year. Rochester, New York launched theirs earlier this year as well. And then New York City launched theirs a couple weeks ago. So now there are a few American cities that have this model, which is really cool. And then there are a bunch of cities across Canada and the US, obviously, that are developing similar services. So Toronto is probably the biggest or the furthest along in Canada, but also there are some cities in British Columbia, including Vancouver, North Vancouver, Victoria, and Ottawa is also developing a similar model. And what Toronto's doing and what we're supporting the City of Toronto in doing is developing a service that is going to launch 4 pilots in early next year. They'd initially said January, but as we've seen in other cities, these things get pushed a little bit. So more likely early February, March-ish of next year, hopefully. And they're going to be 4 geographic-based pilots in 4 different catchment areas in Toronto, including 1 Indigenous-led pilot by and for Indigenous communities. And that will be a geographically based pilot, but they haven't yet determined what the exact catchment area will be. But the Toronto pilots are going to be partnerships with community agencies in each of the catchment areas. So agencies will be able to apply to operate the service. Obviously, the Indigenous-led one will be an Indigenous agency. And the service is going to be accessible via 911, but also hopefully via 211 and via its own separate number, because we know that a lot of folks just don't feel comfortable calling 911. They associate it too strongly with police. They don't want police. They want to know they can access the service without going that way. But then we also know from our town halls is that a lot of folks, 911 is the only number that they know. That's the number they're going to keep calling. So we wanted to make sure that the service would be accessible via as many different pathways as possible to meet as many people's needs as possible. The service is going to be available 24/7, and the pilots are going to run for 3 years, which is quite a long pilot compared to other cities. But the goal is to expand the pilots on a rolling basis as the data comes in, with the goal of having the entire city covered by these kinds of crisis teams by 2026. So by 2026, anyone in Toronto who is calling 911 about a mental health crisis or similar type of social problem that it doesn't require police response will be able to get a team of crisis workers dispatched rather than police to respond to their needs and de-escalate and provide whatever referrals are appropriate. And just briefly, because I know I'm taking a little bit more than 5 minutes, just in terms of how these alternatives address some of the issues faced by queer and trans communities specifically. As we've all commented in the previous question, you know, police are not safe for a lot of queer and trans folks, particularly folks of color, Black folks, Indigenous folks in particular. And, you know, making sure that we have folks who are from the communities that they're serving who can respond to crisis, that's something that's really essential to our model. That's part of why the Indigenous-led pilot was created. As well as geographically based pilots that partner with community agencies. The hope is that the agencies that are partnered with will be agencies that have expertise in serving the area. So, you know, we're hoping that a Black-led organization will be selected for either the Northeast or Northwest pilot, because the predominant demographic of those communities is Black folks. And so it's really important that that is built into this kind of service. And what we also see in other cities is the importance of peer support on these teams. So San Francisco, for example, they have a peer worker on every single team. And the peer workers are, you know, they represent the communities they serve. They're coming from those communities. They have expertise in how to support others who are, you know, particularly marginalized. So that's really important when building these teams, making sure that Black and Indigenous folks, that their voices are centered and that they're represented on these teams, providing support to their communities.
Thank you so much for that, Rachel. Very, very informative. And in fact, I was taking notes as you were speaking, as I do when all of you are speaking. Duane, can I ask you to speak to what alternatives to the traditional model of policing exist and how these alternatives address some of the issues faced by various segments of the queer community?
Mm-hmm. First, I just want to ask Rachel with the cahoots. Is that like did they word it so it's like sounds like in cahoots with?
Yes.
Is that how they did? Okay.
Also an acronym, and I'm gonna forget what the acronym is for, but it's something helping out on the streets.
Okay.
So it's
cahoots.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, in 1993, Tasman-Clinket Council was one of the first 4 to sign our final agreement in the Yukon. And part of that was to negotiate a justice agreement. 18 years later, we finally signed our justice agreement in 2011. That's part of also the colonial systemic oppression. It's how long they drag things out when it comes to negotiating. It shouldn't take 18 years to negotiate something, a justice agreement that we agreed to in our final agreement. But that's a whole other talking series that we can't get into tonight. So part of our justice agreement with Tasman-Clinket Council was to re-establish ourselves as the authority when it comes to the courts, when it comes to enforcement, and when it comes to corrections. And it's a staged in approach, that realizing that it's been a long time since we've been the ones responsible for these issues, so it's going to take some time to get back to that. So the first stage is with the Peacemaker Court, which is our court based upon our traditional law, like Hakusti'i, and then Tlingit, that stands for our way. So we have our Peacemaker Court, which is made up of peacemakers, and the first stage of the court is for them to be mediation, and then the second stage is for them to actually make decisions, binding decisions. We're still in negotiations with the government when it comes to the enforcement and corrections. Now, enforcement, that's the colonial word for it. That I don't like that word, and I don't think any of us likes that word. But that's the word that makes sense to the government when it comes to what are we negotiating. So part of that is for us to have our own police force, whatever we want to call it, and so that the RCMP will no longer be required within our settlement land. That we'll have our own Tlingit police force, and then we'll have our own corrections as well. And again, it's not like a jail. It's not that Western concept of jail. It's going to be on the land. It's going to be healing, and not just for the individual, for those who've been hurt, the families, because it's a community that really gets impacted by when individuals make certain choices. And all the same time is recognizing the intergenerational effects, that the trauma that's been passed down from one generation to the other from various attacks upon us as a people, whether it's residential school or the 60 scoop, or the institutionalization of our people, the throwing them in jail at the drop of a hat. So everything that we're going to be doing is getting back to our way of doing things. And that's the whole focus, is that we looked after our people. We had our own justice system. We had our own enforcement. We had our own way of dealing with people when they hurt themselves or hurt others, long before there was a Yukon and long before there was a Canada. And so it's getting back to that system, and that system is to restore harmony and restore balance in the community. And so sometimes it's hard to get out of that mindset. Like, I've been brought up in that mindset. That's all I know. But for people like my mother and my grandparents who grew up actually in the culture, and before Indian affairs came and messed everything up, it's easy for them. So it's a lot of unlearning that we as individuals have to do as well, and to relearn the old ways once again, and get back to those old ways. When it comes to the queer community, that I really hold my hands up to Queer Yukon and to the prides around the country and around the world who've made an active decision to not have police involved in their functions. To us BIPOC, especially for Black and Indigenous members of the queer community, the police are not a welcoming sight. That they make us feel uneasy, they make us feel unwelcome, and because they've been a tool of oppression for so many years, for so many generations for us. And so that's why I really appreciate when our queer family, the Rainbow family, stands with their Black and Indigenous members and say, no, we're not gonna have you as part of our parade in uniform, as long as the oppression continues. We have it causes division. I'll be honest here. It causes division within the queer community, because there's a lot of members of the community who say, well, what they did in the past, Stonewall and everything else, that's the past, and everything's better now, that they don't throw us in jail for being gay anymore, without recognizing that there's still members of the queer community, the BIPOC members of the queer community, who are still being oppressed by this police force. So it's a conversation that it's a debate that we have quite often within our community on the police being allowed at pride parades or not. Sometimes some police forces throw fuel on the fire by playing the victim when it comes to being excluded from pride parades, and saying, well, we're not all racist. I tend to remind them that might be true, that not all police are racist, but all police work for a racist organization. And I think that's the thing that the message that a lot of people just don't want to hear. I'll just leave it at that. Chishma, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Duane. Lastly, again, Chief Bill, what alternatives to the traditional model of policing exist, and how do these alternatives address some of the issues faced by various segments of the queer community? And I know that you had woven into your previous remarks some of the efforts that you've been engaged in. So please.
Right. And like Duane's community, Kwanlin is, we are negotiating our own administrative justice agreement, and that's done through our modern day treaty. The AJA, as we call it, will provide Kwanlin with a justice framework that will provide a holistic and culturally relevant approach to our justice issues within Kwanlin. These agreements are specific to our community. The community safety officer program will eventually move under that framework, and it will become a permanent part of our justice services that we provide in the community. We've also recently signed a letter of expectation with the RCMP, and that agreement better defines the policing services within the community, and it ensures our cultural needs are reflected in the service the RCMP provides in the community. It also lays out our expectations of the RCMP, council's expectations, and how they operate in the community by working collaboratively with our CSO officers and with the Committee of Citizens and members of our Justice Department. We have also implemented other restorative justice measures alongside of Kwanlin internationally recognized Jackson Lake Healing Camp, which provides trauma-informed programming. And it's really important, and can't underscore enough how trauma-informed programming is a must in the Indigenous community. And I think in almost any Indigenous community you go in, it's really imperative that the people that come into your community are trauma informed, because our people have gone through a lot, and it's imperative that they understand that, and that they treat our people in a way that is culturally appropriate. When we started the CSO program was really when we had the conversation. Once we had that conversations with our citizens, we decided that to make community safety and wellness a priority. Because I think if you're going to deal with healing, you're going to deal with all these issues, you must deal with community safety, because it is at the core of anything you do within the community. Community safety has to be a priority. So we set about with the community building the community safety officer program, and we started by looking at the entire community. We also did what's called an environmental by design portion of that program, and looked at the physical structures in the community. We looked at the buildings for safety, for lighting. We looked at the trails, cleared trails from one end to the other. We looked at everything, fencing, dogs, all kinds of broken down vehicles. We cleaned the community. We took out tons and tons of garbage from the community and really went to work and cleaned it up. Today, people tell me when they drive through the community, it's different. It even feels different. And it's the old broken windows theory, where people need to be proud of the places that they live in. And if there's see one broken window, it leads to another and another, and pretty soon you have a neighborhood that's run down, and all of that. That's what the program is based off of, is the broken windows theory. Now, the community safety officer program, what we heard from our citizens during the consultation was that they felt safer when someone was out there watching. Because when the murder happened in our community, one of the things we did was hire some of our citizens to just drive around and keep an eye on things, and they really liked that. And the more we heard from them, the more we understood that that is something that they really wanted. As a result, we went about building the program from the ground up, and we used real-time statistics from the RCMP. We, from bylaw, we understood from those statistics when the peak hours were and when things were happening, and we built the safety officer program around those hours. What we essentially did was take responsibility for our community and the safety issues, and for us, it has made an incredible difference. It's not only it has saved the RCMP money. It saved time in certain services. When something happens in our community, our citizens now get the help they need. We've asked we expanded the CSO program in the last little while. We started out with 2 officers. We now have 6, and that includes 2 trainees and 6 land stewards. They have a number. We worked with the Justice Institute of British Columbia and built the curriculum to include trauma-informed training, conflict resolution, investigative techniques, and first aid. They don't have enforcement powers, but it's a great example of conflict resolution training. And we the program has been very, very well received by our citizens and by the larger community. We've even had requests to expand it within the city of Whitehorse. But I wish we had the capacity to do it all, but we don't. We just have to pick our battles, if you will. The CSO program, it's important to note that it's consistent with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the calls to justice identified by the National Inquiry into MMIW and MMIWG. And it's also a pillar in the Yukon's MMIW strategy that was recently announced. And it's also consistent with the spirit and intent of our modern day treaties. Right now, the program is funded by both the federal and Yukon governments. And I like to thank them whenever possible, because it's important that when you build these safety programs that are designed to meet the needs in your community, that governments get on board and partner with the First Nations, and instead of just throwing money at the issue, because when you build safety programs, you want to look. For instance, we formed an interagency committee, and anybody who has anything to do with safety sits on that committee. You need to become a partner in the efforts that we have laid out. We work with agencies like SCAN, the Safer Neighborhoods people, and to deal with drug dealers, bootleggers, those kinds of things. When you're talking about something that keeps in my mind, when I talk about all of this stuff and culturally appropriate. And one of the best examples I could give about, how the RCMP needs to change, and I thought about this quite a bit, and I was thinking a long, long time ago, I used to live in Inuvik. I was actually raised there. There was one incident with the RCMP that really changed how people viewed him. It was just one small incident, and it was an event, more or less, and it was some Inuit RCMP officers. There was 2 of them, and they were all drum dancing, and the officers joined in and started to Delta dance. And oh my Lord, you should have seen the whole place lit up. And those pictures went across the country. People were just absolutely inspired by it. It really, people felt really good about it. We held these officers up. And when you think about change within the RCMP, that moment symbolized for me what needs to happen. that's what needs to happen within the RCMP. That's the change that needs to happen, and it needs to happen across the country.
Thank you so much for those insights, Chief Bill. And I want to thank all of you for your insights. Moderating these events feels a little bit like cheating for me, because I get the benefit of you transmitting your knowledge. And as I mentioned, I've been taking notes throughout the course of this evening. So I want to thank all of you. And I think that brings us to our question and answer segment of this evening's event. I'm going to ask the attendees not to use the chat function for this. You'll notice that there's a Q&A there's Q&A functionality. So there's a Q&A icon just to the left of the chat feature where you can ask your questions. So I'm just going to wait about 20 to 30 seconds to see if we have anybody type any questions in the Q&A box. I think our panelists will also be able to see that. So you should be able to see questions as they come up. If in that time there aren't any questions, I certainly have a few questions I can ask. So, but again, in the interest of having said that this feels like cheating, I don't want to continue to cheat. So let's give it about 20 seconds for someone to ask a question.
Could I mention too that originally in TTC with our justice agreement, we did not have community safety officers even on the radar. But after the success of the community safety officers in Kwanlin Dun, and just seeing the change, the positive change that was happening there, a lot of our citizens were asking us, well, why aren't we doing this? And so that's why we added it to our negotiations with the feds. We're like, we want this too, because we want our community to benefit as well as much as Kwanlin Dun has benefited from having those. And so we're just in the process of starting. We have our own little truck. We've got our own little truck, and we have an ex-RCMP. He's Mohawk, who's working for us, Jeff, and he made sure no lights. Don't have any lights on top. We don't want it to look like a cop car at all. But yeah, just wanted to recognize just what started in Kwanlin Dun. The benefits are spreading out throughout the Yukon. There's other communities in the Yukon looking at the CSOs as well as a model that will benefit us all. I just wanted to recognize Chief Doris and all her work with that.
And I can add to that too as well. I am working with Yukon and the federal government to try and expand the program to other First Nations. There are other First Nations throughout the Yukon that have asked for this program and across the country. We've had people from as far away as Labrador come here and visit our community just to see what we were doing. You know, I believe that the federal government has recognized the value and of this particular program, and we're, you know, Kwanlin Dun is a small nation. We're working very hard to try and assist others where we can, and you know, I'm very, very proud of this program, and you know, it's important that these kinds of programs, any kind of community safety programs, is born by the community, because you need the buy-in. You need the buy-in from people who live in the community. And when you bring in outside sources, it oftentimes aspects of it don't work. So yeah.
Thank you for that.
You know, a long time ago, don't worry, I'm not going to get into a big half-hour Tlingit story. No. But Matt Tom, he was my clan leader. He was the clan leader of the Yanyedi, the Wolf Clan in Teslin. He was one of the first community safety officers who wasn't called a community safety officer. It was a program that we had in Teslin, and he was they called him the buckskin badge. And he would drive around town, and And if he saw people doing stuff they shouldn't be doing, well, he would step in and tell them, you stop that, Gordon. And so in his own way, that I think that in Teslin, we're going to recognize Aflou and Matt Tom as the buckskin, to the first buckskin badge.
I love it.
Thank you. So we have two questions that popped up in the chat. I don't know if you can see them, but I will read them out and let me know if any of this bears repeating. So here, let me see if I can push these questions out. So I'll read the question out loud. And the first question is directed to Chief Bill. So Chief Bill, I'll read the question out loud and let me know if you'd like me to repeat it. So the question is, I wonder what larger conversations are happening with local RCMP about more training for officers around the topics we're discussing. I recall the recent 215 memorial at the totem pole where the officer removed his gear and gun and spoke to community members with genuine care and passion. We need more of this. Is local RCMP aware of this? So I guess, the question can really be broken down into two parts. So the first is, what larger conversations are happening with local RCMP about more training for officers around what we've been discussing? And that example of that particular RCMP officer and whether or not local RCMP are aware of this.
Well, I think I can take the credit, and I'm responsible for the officer coming to speak at the event because we, Minister McLean and myself, we noticed that they were standing on the outskirts. When incidents happen, the RCMP, as much as our people are hurt in that, we often forget how they feel. And they were very unsure how to approach the event because it was a very sensitive topic. The RCMP were really the ones were directly involved with taking our children away to residential schools. And they knew that, they were aware of that, but they were unsure how they should approach it. I went over and talked to them, Minister McLean and myself, and we said, come join us. Don't stay on the outskirts. You have to understand, they are part of our community, and it's up to us to make them understand. These particular officers weren't the ones who took our children away. However, they don't, they don't have an intimate knowledge of the issue. These were young officers. They probably had the textbook version of residential school, but they did understand the sensitivity of it. The officer took it upon himself to remove his gear, and I highly respect him for that. And it was the right move. The other issue in regards to in the CSO program, the CSO program is our CSO officers work alongside the RCMP. When we started in the beginning, the RCMP were very, very skeptical of our CSO officers because we built the program. We just built it we didn't need permission. We didn't need anybody's permission to move ahead and to go ahead and build this program. We just did it because it was what our community needed. And I said, let's build it, let's design it. We'll worry about the funding later. So we did it. And in the beginning, the police were very skeptical, as I said. But as they began to understand what the safety officers were doing and how they could assist and help, now they call upon our safety officers and they work alongside each other. You don't want to, I think once, we did a survey amongst our citizens and we asked them about the safety officers, and they were very clear they did not want our safety officers to have enforcement powers because it changes they change into something else. Nowadays, enforcement really means police, RCMP. That's what enforcement means. So unless we can figure out a different way of doing that, you know, we don't want to go there. And that relationship between the RCMP and the CSO officers now, the officers are, the RCMP are one of our biggest supporters. They sing our praises when people go to the RCMP to find out how, you know, how that relationship is working, you know, to get their opinions on the program. And it saved the RCMP money. It's saved in terms of funding, and it's reduced the number of calls to the RCMP. So it frees up the officers to deal with other crimes and other issues. There's and I dare say that they've probably learned a lot themselves about you know, policing in communities. I think they've learned a lot from us, and we you know, today that relationship, I think it's really like I've heard people say in terms of the RCMP officers that we have, because of the letter of expectations, because of the CSO officers, I hear our people speaking very highly of the RCMP in our community. So that relationship has changed as well. And I think you can you know, change things to your advantage if you got to take control. You got to have that community control. It needs to be community driven, and I can't emphasize that enough.
Thank you, Chief Bill. And we've received quite a few more questions since we offered that 30 seconds. And I'd like to thank both Duane and yourself for the exchange you had just before we started getting these questions. I'm going to give you both credit for the small inundation we've had in that intervening period. There's a question, and I'll read this to you. It's actually a simple question. And Duane, perhaps if I can get you to answer this question, followed by Rachel, and then Chief Bill, if you'd like. The question is, what are small changes you are hoping for that will help set everything in motion?
Small changes. Well,
that'll help set everything else in motion.
You know, if we had more members of our community as part of the RCMP, but at the same time, that's not going to solve it. That there needs to be systemic change, but that's not a small thing. The reason why I said before that not all police are racist, but they all work for a racist institution. That many times we see, like especially in the States, there's a lot of Black police officers who actually are involved in the shooting. They're not racist themselves, but they're part of that systemic oppression. So having more of our members as part, but then we hear that on the news, just the racism that they face within the police force, that it drives a lot of them out. And a lot of those stories are coming out into the open right now. But I think one of the small things they can do is to be willing to listen and to try to understand us, whether it's the BIPOC community, Indigenous, Black community, or the LGBTQ2S+ community. Listen to us, and if we have concerns, respect those concerns, and don't try to push your way into something because you're feeling oppressed because you're not allowed to march in a pride parade in your uniform. I know here in Ontario, just recently, that the Ford government, one of the orders they were going to bring in with the lockdown was to give the police the authority to pull over anyone who wasn't in their homes, and they'd have to explain why. Well, throughout Ontario, the BIPOC community, we were terrified because it's like, we're going to be racially profiled even more and the police don't have to. The police won't have to have a reason to pull us over and to question us and to intimidate us. Thankfully, a lot of the police forces, the local police forces, like Ottawa and London and Toronto, they said they weren't going to enforce that portion of the lockdown order. That was huge for them to tell the government, nope, we're not going to do this, because they heard loud and clear from the BIPOC community that this is scary, and this is not going to end well. So that little defiance that they did to the government meant a lot to me as a BIPOC person living here in Ontario, that the police they were listening. And so that's a little thing, but with huge impact.
Thank you, Duane. Rachel, same question. What are some of the small changes you're hoping for that will set everything else in motion?
I think one of the big things is just let your elected officials know that this is something that you care about. This is something that I think in Toronto, 2 years ago, for example, when I started doing this work, there was just no interest from politicians and no interest from the community in building this kind of alternative crisis response service. After George Floyd was killed and after the deaths of 5 Canadians, all of a sudden the community started caring, and people within the community started to talk with their city councilors and their MPs and MPPs about this topic. And because the people in power were hearing a lot about this topic and they could see that the people voting for them cared about this topic, there was a complete 180 as to how politicians were talking about this issue. And, when I started doing this work, I'm a fairly young person who's worked in mental health, but I'm not a famous person with tons of connections or anything like that. So I really wasn't sure, would the people in power, would politicians talk to me? Would they be nice to me? Would they care what I had to say? Would they think that I was just a stupid kid? But people were actually really, really responsive. And, our organization, we met with every city councillor in Toronto and a whole bunch of MPs and MPPs from, across the political spectrum, not just your usual suspects, but lots of different people. And, we talked with them about this issue and why it mattered to us. And we asked folks within our network to do similarly and reach out to their elected officials and let them know that this is something that they care about. And when this motion went to city council to build this new team, council voted unanimously yes, which, 2 years ago, I never would have imagined. There was just no interest. So just recognizing that you as an individual person do have the power to make a difference and to do that, and to let the people who have the power to make the change know that this is something that you care about.
Thanks, Rachel. And Chief Bill, small changes you're hoping for that'll set everything in motion?
Well, sometimes it's those little things that really make a big difference. And, you gave the example of the officer earlier, but I'll give you another example that happened recently around the fire when we were talking about the Kamloops Kamloops situation with the residential school students there. I was called upon by our citizens to come and speak at the event. And for me, I'm a former residential school student. I went to 2 schools in Inuvik. And, one school in particular was pretty notorious. There was a lot of issues at the, around these schools. And I understand over the years, I have gained a greater understanding of what those issues were, because for me, I grew up without parents. I literally grew up in these homes. I grew up in the residential schools. I grew up in the foster system. I grew up, with all of that. And one of the things that, you know, later in life, I've really learned to let a lot of that go. And I've also really learned tolerance. For me, tolerance is extremely important, and understanding, and helping people to understand your position and where you come from. It's why when we were around the fire at the Quanadun's Cultural Center, and I was talking to people, and I was talking directly to the bishop who joined us, one of the bishops from the Catholic Church. I also talked directly to the RCMP and said, come into our circle, because you're part of the community too. You know, these individuals weren't responsible for what took place 50, 60 years ago. However, they were trying to understand, to really understand, and to not you know, tread harshly on a very sensitive, delicate situation. I received a lot of feedback about that, and it really got me thinking, because, you know, people have said what I did by doing that was create a very tolerant event, one that was very inclusive of all peoples. And I think it by developing the tolerance and understanding and educating people, I think we can move mountains. We really can. And I think by engaging your people, engaging the citizens, you know, when you develop these kinds of programs, and that I have a saying that I always say, that, you know, walk with me, help me, help me, because I can't do it alone. Chief and council can't do it alone. We can provide you with the programs, the resources, and the financial means, but if you want to change, that change has to come from within. It has to come from the community. There has to be a fundamental shift, and that happened in our community, a fundamental shift within the community. If you want you to be to live in a safe community, then it's up to you as a citizen and part of that community to help us bring about that change. And I think that, you know, I think that, you know, for me, it's that simple. It doesn't have, you know, it doesn't have a financial cost or whatever, but it's just tolerance and understanding. So let's develop that, and then you bring in all those other stuff. You bring in the love. You bring in all of that. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you. And I'm going to cheat a little bit because I think in listening to all of your responses, there's something interesting, and I want to ask you just as a follow-up question to that last question. So, Duane, for example, you were talking about, you know, listening as really being important, like really listening being important, and I'm processing Chief Bill's answer to that question about tolerance being important, and trying to understand that these particular officers were not the officers 50 or 60 years ago that were personally responsible. However, they're trying to understand and to navigate something which is particularly sensitive. And I want to ask all of you, with those responses in mind, do those people listening, do we have to, is it important for us to understand that these conversations aren't going to be comfortable, and we have to accept that in listening, we shouldn't expect these conversations to be comfortable conversations, and that should not be a reason to either shut down or to engage defensively, that we're in the process of, in some ways, re-understanding these myths that go into our past, whether that is the RCMP as an institute. You know, it's semi-mythical, you know, in some respects. If you traveled to England or to Europe, the image that they have of the RCMP is one that's very different from the discussion that we've been happening. And so to shatter some of those myths and to understand that, look, that's going to be uncomfortable, but you need to engage. That's a sign that this is an important conversation worth having. And I'm hoping maybe if the three of you can react to that, and I'm going to start this time with Rachel, and then, you know, Duane with yourself, and then with yourself, Chief Bill, if you just want to react to that particular point.
Yeah, I would say that is a really important point in the work that our organization has been doing. You're not going to make very much change if you're only talking to people who already agree with you. The change gets made when you're talking with people who don't agree with you, and when you're willing to listen to what they have to say and hear different perspectives that people are bringing, and be able to engage from that place of from genuinely listening and wanting to understand, and to really collaborate and work together to make the best possible outcome for everyone. So absolutely.
Thanks, Rachel. Duane?
Well, I think that applies to all of us. Whenever change needs to happen, that a lot of times it's getting involved in those uncomfortable conversations and maybe hearing things that we don't really want to hear, but we need to hear. Well, I was really inspired when, after the 215 children found in the unmarked graves in Kamloops, that my Raven sister, Jackie Shorty, was one of the ones who helped organize the memorial at the Catholic Church up in Whitehorse, of placing the kids' shoes on the steps. And that was so beautiful, so powerful, a silent tribute, that I talked to an Algonquin elder down here and asked if I could do the same down here in Pembroke, and the Algonquin elder gave me their blessing. I might be Indigenous, but I always recognize that I'm a guest on these lands. So we organized on Monday, whenever that was, seems like forever ago. It was just, what, 2 weeks ago? That on the Catholic Cathedral here, that we would gather at 6 o'clock, because everybody was gathering at 6 o'clock around the country. And it was completely unorganized. It was just a call went out for anyone who's interested in coming at 6 o'clock. We'll meet in front of the cathedral here in Pembroke and bring some shoes. And it was amazing, all the people that showed up, and it was a lot of the non-Indigenous community that came, because the Algonquins were having their own ceremony in their community, which is about 50 kilometers from here. So this memorial was more for those who weren't Algonquin, though thankfully some Algonquin did show up, and they started the evening with their prayers and their songs and their traditions, because this is their land. But just to see the support that was there, and there was a lot of Catholics. There was a lot of Catholics who were there, and I spoke, and one of the things that I said is that I was brought up Catholic. My mom went to Lower Post Catholic residential school, and so she was brought up Catholic herself, and my dad's also Catholic. So standing at the steps with this big cathedral behind me it made me feel intimidated. It's the same thing as how I feel when I'm around the police. It instinctually brings up these feelings. And so one of the things I spoke about was that it was hate and intolerance that caused the residential school, and for these children to be buried and not go home. And I said, we're not going to return hate and intolerance. We're going to return it with love and forgiveness. And I said, these people who ran this church and ran these residential schools, they're hurting as well by the harm they caused us. And I said, we're all in need of healing. And I said that these shoes are meant as a silent reminder to honor those children, but also as a silent reminder to the Catholic Church of their role in all of this, And also a reminder to them that they're the only church that hasn't apologized to us, to the residential school survivors and the children of and the grandchildren of, and all of us are impacted by residential school. So I said, I talked to the Catholics who were gathered there. There was over 100 people who were there. I said, for you who belong to the Catholic Church, I said, the message for your priests, the message to your bishop is that the Pope needs to apologize and to take ownership for this. And I said, that's the message that we were asking, that we would want to give across, because I said, once that apology is given, healing can start for both communities. I'm sorry is it seems so trivial, but a huge impact and huge words that assist with healing. When my mom apologized to me for what she put me through, because she was the residential school survivor, after telling me she loved me, the most important thing she ever told me was she was sorry. And that's the anger that I had towards her for all those years and stuff just melted away. It didn't change the past, but it helped us get over it and move on. And I think that's when it comes with the RCMP, when it comes with the church, that little acts like that can go so far in this mutual healing to restore the relationship and to restore the balance that's been lost and that's been broken. And I think that's the long term, that's the ultimate goal of that restoration of us as a human family.
Thank you so much for that answer, Duane. Lastly, Chief Bill, the idea of again that these are going to be uncomfortable discussions, and that shouldn't prevent people from shying away or engaging with them simply because they're uncomfortable.
And I think change should be uncomfortable. Sometimes it really should. I really love what Duane had to say, because that was, we could have responded in a very different way, and we would have been justified in doing so. However, our people chose to approach this with love and forgiveness, and we sent a silent reminder to the church at the same time. But at the same time, we welcomed the bishop into our circle because we wanted him to understand, and we wanted him to hear from our people. We wanted him to hear first from the survivors firsthand. When you're dealing with these difficult issues like community safety, it is uncomfortable because you're dealing with changing people's behavior. You're dealing with their livelihoods in some cases, because, as much as we hated, selling drugs has become a really lucrative industry. So is selling alcohol and a number of other criminal activities. And you're trying to at the same time educate them that their behavior is really impacting our community in a negative way. So a lot of what you do when you have the conversation with citizens, when you have the conversations with RCMP and other people, it's very difficult and it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people, and it has to be. And you go through, when you talk about community safety, you start at a certain level. Usually when people institute a community safety program, I find it's always during a crisis. They start to look at what is happening. It's a major crisis that has happened, and that spurs them into action, and you go from there. And you start at that point. And when you develop the community safety programs, as you begin to implement them, you then begin to question whether or not you're doing the right thing. You get pressure from the drug dealers, you get pressure from their families, you get pressure from your community. It comes from all over. There were times, and I've seen this with other chiefs when they implement the program, there were times when I would talk to other chiefs and they would cry. They were literally crying because of that pressure becomes so intense. And I just, I encourage them, hang in there. It gets better. I know exactly where you are in the process. I can, just by not even talking to you, I can tell exactly where you are. And then down the road, I would talk to the same chief and they'd be over the moon because of what has taken place, the transformation, and they're seeing the results of what they have implemented. Community safety, I always say, is hard. It's hard for anyone. And when you make those difficult decisions, you need to stand by those decisions. You need to be Teflon. Really, you need to be Teflon to implement them. And you need good leadership. You need healthy leadership. And you need leadership that will stand by those decisions. And change is hard, but it can also be really good and it can be rewarding. And I'll just leave it at that. And yeah, it's change is sometimes uncomfortable, but it can be really good too.
Thank you so much, Chief Bill. And I think we're going to have to end on that note. We're about 20 minutes past our original end time, but as a testament to how valuable all of your insights are, we've barely lost any participants since we started. So for the most part, everybody stuck around to hear all of your insights. So I want
do you have the names of those who dropped out?
I have not been.
I want that list.
Well, at the Yukon Human Rights Commission, we don't like to police those that drop off participation lists, just in keeping with the theme of
I'm just kidding.
I know you are. But I do want to thank all of you again for your tremendous insights, the transmission of knowledge, for us to be able to receive that, and also to the organizers of this event who did such a fabulous job in putting this together. I'm grateful immensely on behalf of the Yukon Human Rights Commission. I would like to thank all of you for your contributions. And again, as I say, this is the start of a conversation. These are starts of partnerships. They're certainly not the end of them. We all, we have a lot of work to do, speaking for the commission, and we hope to keep these conversations going so that we can continue to learn from all of you. And so, thank you so much. And I do want to thank the participants who took time out of their Tuesday evening on a school night to join us to have this discussion. My apologies for not being able to get to all of the questions. We still had quite a few that had come in. Unfortunately, we were constrained by time, but please do reach out to us. Please reach out to Queer Yukon, and we can look into passing some of those questions to the guests. So thank you all very much. Deeply appreciated. And we hope to cross paths again. And thank you to everyone for joining us this evening.
Sheesh,
Thank you.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride. And enjoy the rest of your evening, everybody.
Happy Pride. Good night.